Hey everyone, my name is Jason Owens. I'm the founder of Campaign Sauce. I really appreciate you joining me here for this very quick explainer video on the best way to set up your podcast. Mainly what we're looking for here is simplifying your workflow so that you can accomplish more in less time. All right, so let's dive in. Okay, so the big question, if you were just to boil everything down in podcast world, the big question is who owns something called your podcast feed? Okay, now your podcast feed is where your episodes themselves live, and it's a way for you to get your podcast out to the world. Okay, so depending upon how you have yours set up, it can either be really easy and flexible for you, or it can kind of be a bit of a pain. So in this first example, I'm calling this the hosting service example. So you can see here, this first box is your podcast hosting service. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, a podcast host it's kind of like YouTube, but it's really for audio files, right? It's a place that you put your files up in the cloud so that people aren't going over to your website and bogging it down. And it's just a very easy way to go ahead and syndicate this podcast feed. And by syndicate, what we mean here is, if you look over on this side, you see Apple Podcast Directory, all right? Well, that's just one of the many places that your feed can point to, right? I mean, the whole name of the game here is getting your stuff out to the widest audience possible. So a lot of people that I work with will take their feed and they will syndicate it, meaning they will send their information to things like Spotify or places like iHeartRadio or Stitcher, right? I mean, there are seems to be a bajillion places where you can send your podcast feed once you have it established. So Apple, of course, is the 800-pound gorilla in the podcasting world, but there are other places where you can pick up some really respectable traffic. So again, a lot of people will start off with they'll buy some hosting service, right? Upload their files there and just create their feed off of their podcast hosting service. Well, okay, let's see how that pans out. And here's an example of all the different places that you could possibly syndicate. And this is a very small list of the places where you can syndicate. So a while back, I had a podcast that I was running called the Renewable Confidence Podcast, and I syndicated all over the place, right? Of course, we did it to Apple. You can go down the list here and see iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, also the website. So I sent that everywhere. And again, a lot of people do that. Now, going back to this example here of the hosting service, if you create your feed from your hosting service, which a lot of hosting services will allow you to do that, okay, whenever you have somebody out there in the world and they're on their phone and they're like, oh, okay, wow, I just discovered such and such podcast, I want to listen to it. All right, so they go out to Apple and they find this on the podcast directory. Okay, they're actually going to go way back to the podcast hosting service to get that file, okay? They're not listening to your file on Apple. Apple does not want your file. Apple just wants your feed. And the same thing goes with all the other podcast directories. Your file does not live on those directories. That directory is just simply a pointer that points you back to your podcast hosting service. All right, now, what happens if you want to change your hosting service? All right, this is where things start to get a little sticky. So in changing your hosting service, and again, it could be that the customer service went downhill. It could be that their pricing increased to a point where you don't like it anymore. Maybe you're growing and you just want a different plan. You know, there are a dozen reasons you can change your hosting service. But in changing that hosting service, well, if that's gone from your life, where's your feed coming from? Well, if you nix your hosting service, guess what? Your feed's gone too. Well, if you bring in your new hosting service, okay, now you've got to go recreate that feed, and now you've got to go tell Apple and everybody else in the world, everyone else who had your old feed, you now need to go tell them that you have a new feed, right? And there are, some technical things you can get into and redirects and all that, and there's a bit of technical hoopla that you can jump through. Frankly, it's a bit of a pain in the neck, right? It's not really the best solution. And I think that we have a more elegant solution here at Campaign Sauce, so let me unpack this for you. All right, so what we end up doing here at Campaign Sauce is that we help you create what's called a standalone podcast feed website. All right, so let me explain to you what I mean by this. This is completely separate from your existing website, right? All we're doing here is just creating a feed. We won't even tell Google that this site is here. In fact, we'll tell Google to stay away from it, right? We don't really want search engine traffic coming here. This is just to create kind of that technical connection in the background, right? And there's not really going to be much here for any casual user to look at, right? You'll end up hosting this thing or syndicating it dozens of other places. You don't really want people coming here. So it's going to be separate from your existing website. This works great for agencies like Campaign Sauce to help with, because we can come in here, we can do all of our work. We're not getting into any of your website or any of the proprietary nature of some stuff you might have in there. We're not into accidentally messing up things that are already created. You could have hundreds of posts in there, right? And we don't want anything to go sideways. So we have our own little working space that we have down here. And that's what is just amazing about having this standalone website here. It just allows us to get in and do our thing and create tons of really good value for you. This little site, it's going to be pretty small. We're going to host this for you, and we're going to back it up regularly, right? So I have a pretty strong feelings about backing up websites, and I love just seeing this work. And it's a good process that we have set up here. You own this domain, right? And usually it's going to be some 4-letter acronym like MMCI. Like I have a podcast called Monday Morning Check-In. So there's an MMCI podcast.com, right? And that's where my feed lives, okay? That's separate from my other main website that I have for Campaign Sauce, the company. So you own that domain and you own the site. This is not some lease-to-own program where if you stop working with my company, we're going to hold this thing hostage. No way. This is your site. We created it for you. You paid for it. It is all yours. All right, so let me unpack what the schematics now look like. So you saw some diagrams before. Let's check this out. So we still have this standalone podcast website feed here, and it goes ahead and it creates the podcast feed itself. It's not coming from the hosting company anymore, right? And again, we're going to take that feed and we're going to send it out to Apple and Stitcher and Google and Spotify and iHeartRadio and all the other places that you want your podcast to be seen. And when we have this podcasting or this podcast hosting service, right? It's still here. It's still very much in the picture. It's just where your files live. It does not have a connection to your feed at all, right? So somebody out here is going to go into one of the podcast apps. They're going to find you. That's interesting. I want to listen to that. Click, right? So where are they going to get that file? They're getting it from the podcast hosting service, just like before. Okay, so if you remember that earlier diagram, they would end up, the feed would come out of the hosting service. Well, now that feed is coming from your standalone website. Now, here's the fun part. Let's say that you want to go ahead and move in a new hosting service. Okay, easy to do, right? Look what happens to the feed. A whole bunch of nothing. That feed stays right there where it belongs. You do not need to go do any technical hoopla in the background. You don't need to do a whole bunch of nonsense. You pretty much just move in a new hosting service. You change some file names, and that's it. You are good to go, right? So you don't have to worry about any of those redirects or any of that technical stuff going on in the background. It's just much easier to bring that new hosting service in. And just all around, this just allows you to have much more flexibility, allows you to bring in an agency like Campaign Sauce to help you publish your podcasts on a regular basis and make sure that all that syndication is set up for you. And it's really slick. So this has been working very well for people that we've been working with. So again, we have a great podcast publication program. It is really fun to work with you. It's so simple. It is so easy. All you do is you create your podcast episode exactly like you're doing today. You have this audio file that you then upload to our little shared directory that we set up. Once you upload that file and tell us just a couple pieces of information about the file, you are good to go. You do not have to do anything else, right? We will take care of the rest for you. We will take care of getting that guy published, making sure that Apple knows about it, making sure that it's syndicated across all those different channels. And really, you just get the fun part. You get to go create, and you don't have to worry about all this technical stuff in the background. Let us do that for you. So In short, that's it. That's the presentation today. Hope you guys are having a great time. If there's anything that we here at Campaign Sauce can do for you, just reach out to me directly. You see my email here at the bottom of the screen, jason@campaignsauce.com. We'd love to help you. Take care.